Welcome to Matters Financial and Geopolitical from the Frontier. Trust you had a good weekend. I certainly did. Read a lot. Yellen leads world in betting inflation will soon accelerate, and this has been one of the quandaries of this whole quantitative easing exercise, is in that inflation has been so tame. And I, for one, believe that it's it's the moment before the storm when you're suddenly going to see a surge. But the jury's still out. Home thoughts. I've been reading some Carlos Fuentes. One wants to tell a story like Scheherazade in order not to die. It's one of the oldest urges in mankind. It's a way of stalling death. Not too long ago, and then one of the stories I was reading was called Chac, Mool. I'll just read you a bit. Not too long ago, Filbert died by drowning in Acapulco. It happened during All Saints' Week. Although he'd been dismissed from his job in the ministry, Filbert couldn't resist the bureaucratic temptation to go, same as every year, to the German pension, to eat sauerkraut sweetened by the sweat of the tropical kitchen, to dance on the Saturday of Glory in La Quebrada, and to himself feel irregular in the dark anonymity of evening on the beach of Homos. Clearly, we know that in his youth he had swum well, but now at 40, and in as bad shape as he seemed to be, try to cover, and at midnight, such a distance. Frau Muller wouldn't permit his vigil, such an old client, to be held in the pension. On the contrary, that night she organized a dance on the little suffocated terrace while Filbert waited very pallid in his box for the morning truck to depart the terminal. Passed the first night of his new life accompanied by baskets and bundles. When I arrived early to watch over the shipment of the coffin, Filbert was under a mountain of cocoa nuts. The driver said we should arrange him quickly on the awning and cover him with tarps so that the passengers wouldn't get frightened, and to make sure we wouldn't bring a curse on the voyage. And then the narrator picks up this Mexican relic called a Chac Mool and puts it in his basement. Today I discovered that at night the Chac Mool leaves the house. Always at dusk he sings a song, out of tune and ancient, older than singing itself. Later it stopped. I knocked several times at his door. When he didn't answer me, I dared to enter. The bedroom, which I hadn't seen again since the day of the statue, tried to attack me, is in ruins. The smell of incense and blood that has permeated the house is concentrated there. But behind the door there are bones, dog-boned rats and cats. This is what the Chac Mool steals in the night to sustain himself. This explains all the frightening barking at the door. David Yarrow, who I follow and is a tremendous photographer, is in Tsavo East, tweeted full-on day in Tsavo East. This really is a land of giants. I was hiding under my Land Rover to take this. Never a dull moment here. Have a look at our video when we had a late encounter in the evening with elephants at Nazima Springs when we were staying with Finch Hattons. David Yarrow again. It's day one in the Tsavo National Park, southeast Kenya, and the goal is to take a portrait of one of the last 7 or 8 super tuskers in the world. Sunset, Christmas Day, Tsavo East. It's a photograph I took a few years ago, and another one of wild white flowers in Tsavo East as well. Leave you with a Kerouac quote: "The great blazing stars came out, the far receding hills got dim. I felt like an arrow that could shoot all the way." Political reflections: Iraqi army clashes with Kurds in operation to impose security in Kirkuk. Iraqi forces have reportedly advanced on Kirkuk's oil fields and airbase after the Prime Minister of Iraq, Haider al-Abadi, ordered his army to impose security on the Kurdish city. In the wake of a recent vote for independence, Kurdish fighters seized Kirkuk in mid-2014 after Iraqi forces had fled from the Islamic State extremists advancing towards them after sacking Mosul. The Kurds, I'm afraid, jumped the gun and are now going to be squeezed from all sides. China's next 5 years, only Xi is indispensable, says the FT. Mao beat the foreign invaders and Deng ended hunger. Xi talks about having confidence in our political and economic system. It's a total breakthrough. Yet, as a strategist, Xi is much smaller than Mao and Deng in every respect. Deng rarely and Mao never took charge of everything. They only took charge of the big things. Xi Jinping takes everything, big and small, in his own hands. Xi worries about appearance. When Mao and Deng made their minds up, they would stick with it because it can take years to see the real effects of your struggle. Mr. Xi's dominance is such that, as Shi Ying-hong, Professor of International Relations at Renmin University in Beijing, says, guessing who will be on the next standing committee is in a sense irrelevant. Everyone will be Xi's man. No one except Xi is indispensable. Xi has problems to deal with, but look at the US, said Professor Shi. The president is crazy, Congress divisive, and people divided, while Europe has a solvency problem. Xi believes China will continue to be vigorous, strong, and rising. He has great hope that by the end of his tenure, China's national resurgence can be fundamentally realized. My piece at the end of August was called China Rising, and it was exactly about this. And another article in The Guardian, the window was half open and he looked out at us and smiled. When he waved, it was as if he was in slow motion. He didn't say a single word, but I felt so excited. Whatever people may have to say about Xi Jinping, he's actually been a popular leader. The economy remains strong, corruption has been contained, China is internationally much more accepted as being in the top league and is calling the shots. In Trumpian terms, he's managed to make China look great again. Came across a tweet saying it seems Governor Jeb Bush is a prophet. Donald Trump is a chaos candidate and will be a chaos president, he said. End of May, I wrote a piece, Apocalypse Trump, said the same thing. North Korea and Trump's reality-free zone tweeting about Armageddon. It seems pretty clear that the current incumbent of the White House still resides in the fantasy land of reality shows, with no grasp of the potential global pyromaniacal Armageddon he jokes about unleashing. Cato the Elder used to end every speech with Carthago delenda est. Carthage, bitter rival and enemy of Rome, must be destroyed. Now it's Iran's turn, and asking who would trust America's word after deal-break Trump. Russian defense ministers beginning his first official visit to Israel, that's from the Jerusalem Post. Malaysian Airlines Flight 370 search, why give up hope when there was none? It's been 3 years and 7 months since flight MH370 vanished in the heart of a quiet night above the South China Sea. The Boeing 777 had been travelling northeast from Kuala Lumpur to Beijing, where it was scheduled to land at 6:30 a.m. on March the 8th. When the co-pilot signed off from Malaysian airspace with the now infamous words, "Good night, Malaysia 370." Indeed, what the pros did next was remarkably successful in helping the authorities regain control of the media narrative, in helping to reassure a worried public that even if the plane's exact location was not known, everything was nevertheless under control. Seemingly against all odds and logic, those in charge declared the plane's final resting place to be somewhere in the southern Indian Ocean, thousands of kilometers in the opposite direction from where it was headed. It is almost inconceivable and certainly societally unacceptable in the modern aviation era for a large commercial aircraft to be missing, and for the world not to know with certainty what became of the aircraft and those on board. This is the Australian Transport Safety Bureau. That raises uncomfortable questions. To what extent did the authorities ever believe the search would succeed? Did they believe their own bluster? And if not, why not? Was the entire process an elaborate charade aimed more at silencing a braying media than it was at finding the truth, an attempt to delay that admission of defeat until a time when pictures of the weeping relatives of 239 lost souls were not needing daily news bulletins across the world? Launching the search then contradicted a maxim known to everyone involved in investigating plane crashes over water: find debris first, work out the crash zone second, look underwater third. First and foremost, you must find pieces of debris and formally identify them as coming from the plane. The ocean is a dustbin, and from a long way out you arrive in the whirling currents of the Indian Ocean gyre, said Troy Deck, who led the search for AF 447. One question lingers: was this incredible fiasco due to incompetence on the Australians' behalf, or was it an orchestrated show primarily aimed at satiating a media hungry for MH370 related news? The natural conclusion of this sad story, if we were to follow the official line, is that a plane as big as a Boeing 777, loaded with electronics and equipped with several redundant communication systems, not to mention the hundreds of mobile phones of its passengers, can become perfectly stealthy in a few seconds in one of the most closely monitored regions of the planet. MH370 managed to do what decades and billions in research have not yet achieved for the most sophisticated military plane. And every one of the 10 million passengers who board a plane every day must hope their plane won't be up to the same trick. And this too, Ghislain Wattrelos told Society magazine that France believes the Inmarsat data was doctored. I take you back to August 2014 when I wrote a piece called The Signal announcing this new arrhythmic normal was the disappearance of MH370. Picking up the signal through the noise of our world in 2014 is no easy thing. In fact, my view is that the new normal is a very arrhythmic world. When I plugged arrhythmia into my computer, it threw up this. For years, he'd been studying the phenomenon of chaos, of which an arrhythmic heartbeat was a perfect example. His Excellency Johann Borgstam told me the signal announcing this new arrhythmic normal was the disappearance of MH370. Since then, planes have been falling out of the sky like flies, and the uncertainty around MH370 and MH17 is sharpened by the way the story is seemingly turned on and off. It took me back to Don DeLillo. We are not witnessing the flow of information so much as pure spectacle or information made sacred, ritually unreadable. The small monitors of the office, home and car become a kind of idolatry here where crowds might gather in astonishment. South Korea and the US are conducting joint maritime drill involving the carrier Ronald Reagan amid high tensions on the Korean Peninsula. Currency markets: euro dollar 117.86, dollar index 93.15, Japanese yen 111.78, Swiss franc 0.9758, the pound last trading at 132.97. The Australian dollar 0.7875, Indian rupee 64.705, South Korean won 11.2706, the Rial 314.58, Egyptian pound 17.6495, South African rand 13.3021. The rand has had a good rebound from close to 13.70. Put up a 3-month chart of the dollar index, and still that level of 93.50 is the key level. Euro started a tad lower to the week after Merkel's CDU posted its worst election result in Lower Saxony since 1959, and Austria moved to the right. We're trading at 117.86. Commodity markets: gold, inexorable rise, now at 13.04. It's come back well. Brent crude surged 1.1%, and if not more now, on military clashes in Iraq. And that was a big move. The geopolitics of oil is once again coming off the back burner. My piece over the weekend was taking sub-Saharan Africa's economic temperature. Last week, the IMF released the World Economic Outlook, and the World Bank released its 16th edition of Africa's Pulse. Both reports are important thermometers for taking the continent's temperature. Sub-Saharan Africa grew just 1.3% in 2016, which was the lowest rate of GDP expansion for 2 decades. And just about everyone was scanning the horizon looking for a more muscular rebound. The IMF is forecasting a GDP expansion rate of 2.7% in 2017, around a full percentage point below that for the whole world, and less than half the 1999-2008 average of 5.6%. World Bank is predicting an SSA expansion of 2.4%. The World Bank said regional per capita output growth is forecast to be negative for the 2nd consecutive year, while investment growth remains low and productivity growth is falling. What the World Bank is saying that the average African is going to be worse off, notwithstanding the plus 2.4% expansion. There is a famous refrain that reverberates across the continent: you cannot eat GDP, and indeed for 2 years now our cake baking has not kept up with population growth, giving more oxygen to that refrain. As we all know, Africa is not a country, it's a continent, and to properly understand the situation we need to deconstruct the GDP number. South Africa and Nigeria make up half of sub-Saharan African GDP, and had been a significant headwind of late. South Africa, which experienced a bumper harvest because of better rainfall, the southern part of the continent had optimal rainfall in fact, has emerged from 2 successive quarters of negative growth. Nigeria exited a 5-quarter recession and is expected to post a positive number of around 0.8% this year. Neither of the 2 biggest economies' rebounds are muscular, but they're currently no longer contracting. Bloomberg View carried an interesting article about agriculture last week and noted that agriculture still accounts for a quarter of GDP in sub-Saharan Africa and as much as 2/3 of employment in sub-Saharan Africa. In fact, agricultural growth has the biggest impact on non-farm income and reducing poverty. Bloomberg View also noted that small plot farmers account for 90% of all farms in sub-Saharan Africa. When the farm economy does well, food prices stay under control and we see much better economic diffusion. The African Development Bank's President Adesina is making a big push in this space, and it's not difficult to see why. Both economic updates show Ethiopia, even with its state of emergency, is the fastest growing in Africa, with the IMF forecasting a 9% GDP expansion for 2016-2017. Ghana is also outperforming with expectations of a 6.3% expansion this year. When you set aside the 3 largest sub-Saharan African economies, South Africa, Nigeria and Angola, SSA's aggregate growth rate for this year rises from 2.5% to almost 4%, says Brookings. This is faster than the 3.5% rate at which the global economy is currently growing. In fact, 5 of the 10 fastest growing economies in the world are in Africa. And over the next 5 years, around half of all sub-Saharan African economies will expand at an average rate similar to or higher than that which prevailed during the Africa Rising heyday. The IMF is predicting that Kenya will expand 5% this year and 5.5% next year. Politics has taken a very big bite out of Kenya's economy this year. That forecast is surely hostage to how the next few weeks play out. The real economy needs a political guillotine on October the 26th, in my view. Death toll from massive truck bomb in Mogadishu rises to 189, making it Somalia's deadliest single blast. The toll is above 300 now. Rashid Abdi said has not had an effective government since the collapse of Said Barre's dictatorship in 1991. It's a clear signal that Al-Shabaab is not down and out. Indeed, it's escalating the war. In this photograph, Somali children are seen carrying away the charred remains of their mother. This is unbelievable and tragic, and I extend my deepest condolences. They sing, you need a weapon to fight, a weapon to get cattle, a weapon to kill. If you can't kill, you aren't a man. We are the Noya fighters. And then an interview with Salva Kiir, he says, you either defend yourself or you are swept away. Saying Kiir has presided over the world's youngest nation as it descended into civil war, famine, and a historic refugee crisis. Kiir is the heart of the problem, said Princeton Lehman, the former US envoy to Sudan and South Sudan. Yet even as the United States threatens to withdraw aid, Kiir has shown no sign of contrition and no intention to reform. According to the Financial Times, Emerson Mnangagwa was allegedly targeted with a poison-laced vanilla cone. Something to think about as the war for succession seems to gain energy and vim in Zimbabwe. A worsening crisis in Congo and the threat it poses to US national security is a piece by John Prendergast and Sasha Lesnev, talking about how for the last 2 decades fighting has plagued the eastern region of the DRC, resulting in 5.4 million deaths, rampant corruption, and one of the highest rates of sexual violence in the world. The instability has already spread beyond the east as a constitutional and electoral crisis propels the fragile situation toward a larger conflict, and it is now threatening to destabilize a mineral-rich area known as Katanga. Katanga is home to 50 to 60% of the world's reserves of cobalt, representing the largest global supply of the mineral as well as significant quantities of copper. And saying if something breaks out there, it's going to significantly affect the national interest of the UK and the US. And basically, Prendergast is calling for more aggressive financial sanctions on the president. President Joseph Kabila and his wife Marie-Olive Lembe-de-Sita, road chiefs, is saying this is a first couple that is not in a hurry to leave. That's all about the DRC Congo's presidential poll not happening until the mid-2019. South African oil shares up 14.26% this year, and at a record high. Dollar versus rand, the rand has improved to 13.30. Nigerian oil share up 37.11% year to date. Ghana Stock Exchange up 35.34% year to date. As I said, the Kenyan economy needs a guillotine on the October the 26th. Whether we get it or not is currently up for debate. Here in this photograph, you can see President Kenyatta on the campaign trail. In this next photograph, you see Raila Odinga, who said, we shall not cease nor tire until the will of the people prevails in full. He was in Mombasa over the weekend. This is a superb shot by Baz Ratner of yesterday's tear gassing of opposition protests in Nairobi. That's via Reuters Pictures. I like this photograph of a beautiful herd of Ankoli cattle on Old Pajetta, photo by Jose Soto Ferraris. Foreign retail chains get a foothold in Kenyan market. This is all the woes of Nakumatt, talking about Carrefour and Choppies. Nairobi oil shares up 19.43% so far this year. Ahead of KenGen's full year results release later this week, tune into my interview with Rebecca Miano, the MD and CEO of KenGen. KenGen share price is up, and eye-catching 50% so far this year. NSE 20 is up 13.82% so far this year, and Mount Kenya senior photograph from Nyeri Hill in 1910 by the American Delia Akili. This was posted by Mount Kenya Trust. Once again, thank you for stopping by.